Hi, my name's Isabel and this is my video about living with tinnitus. So for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm a musician and I also coach people in songwriting, and I've released 4 albums and I've also studied music up to PhD level. So music's a massive part of my life. But in 2011 I developed tinnitus after an ear infection, and it completely changed my whole relationship to hearing. So if you're watching now and you are suffering from tinnitus, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, especially if when you first developed it, it was quite difficult and challenging for you. You also might recognise what I'm talking about in this video if you know someone who's suffering from tinnitus. So I hope this is helpful to you. I'm just going to go through all the things that I did that helped me learn to live with tinnitus and go on and do lots and lots of things that I have always dreamt about doing despite having tinnitus. It's obviously not medical advice. It may not also work for everyone, but I hope that there's bits and bobs that are going to help you manage your own condition or a loved one or a friend. The other thing that I'm going to do is put loads of references underneath this video, so everything I mentioned from equipment down to websites or types of therapy, and even links to meditations and things like that, I'll put down there so that you've got as much as I can give you to help you deal with tinnitus. I should also say the reason I decided to do this video is because I wrote a song about having tinnitus, which is the song that you are listening to at the moment underneath this video. It's called Little Sounds of Pain, and because of that, people who have heard that song who are suffering from tinnitus often get in touch with me. Often it's when they're at the beginning of developing tinnitus, which is a really hard time for many people, and they're suffering and they're kind of in crisis mode. And for whatever reason, either aren't able to access healthcare or support, or the support they're getting isn't quite enough, or they're just curious to see if there's anything else they can do. And because I've been contacted so much, I really felt like it was important that I did this video so that I can put people in touch with all the different things that I did. And so it's going to be relatively detailed, but hopefully really informative, and be a kind of educational resource of a kind, even though it's quite a personal one, to help people out there. So the first thing I want to talk about, which is really important, is if you are in crisis mode at the moment with your tinnitus, then these are the things that I would suggest you do right now. Crisis mode is really what I would call if you're feeling suicidal, if you're feeling really hopeless and desperate, if you're not sleeping at all. These are all things that I felt and I experienced, so I absolutely know what you're going through and I know how hard this is. So this is what I would recommend you do. If you are living in the UK, call the British Tinnitus Association 24-hour hotline. They have trained people who will talk you through what's going on, give you advice and put you in the direction of help. It's really important that you can talk to somebody who knows what you're going through. If you're not living in the UK and you don't have a 24-hour hotline that you can call, try and find a friend or family member who you think would be good to talk to, who would understand you, and tell them how you're feeling. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable. Don't be afraid to tell them that you need help and you're not coping. There's absolutely no shame in that. It's completely natural. Tinnitus is one of those conditions that it can be hard to imagine what it's like until you have it. But believe me, many people feel incredibly challenged. All of the things I mentioned, suicidal, desperate, hopeless. It's a very natural reaction to it. It's an isolating thing to go through and a lonely thing to go through, so you need to reach out to people who are going to be there for you. If there isn't somebody who you can talk to, or you feel like you need more support, try and find a support group. There are lots of them out there all over the world. it's really important that you can find people who you can talk to who understand what you're going through. So I definitely try and get in touch with someone like that. I would say the most important thing to not do is to go on chat rooms. Usually they are filled with people who have spent a long time in crisis mode and haven't been able to get out. That doesn't mean that that's because they have tinnitus. That could be for a variety of reasons. The way that somebody deals or relates to tinnitus is very based on context. The support networks you have, what else is going on in your life, what are the other challenges. So when you go on a chat room, often you'll find it's mainly negative comments about how awful it is to live with tinnitus. This is the first thing that I did when I didn't find enough help from my GP, and I wish I'd never done it because it put the absolute fear into me. I later met other people who had tinnitus who were leading completely normal lives, and I wish I'd met them right from the off chance, because that's actually the experience of most people with tinnitus. So the track that you're listening to right now, the person who's playing violin, Ruby Colley, who's an amazing violinist, you should definitely check her music out. She has tinnitus too, and I met her just when I first developed tinnitus. So it was so brilliant to see this incredibly talented, competent, intelligent, beautiful woman who also had tinnitus and was still living a normal life, and it wasn't bothering her. So do not go on chat rooms. Find people out there in your real physical world, or even in an online tinnitus help group. But don't go on chat rooms. So if you're not aware of what hearing therapy is, hearing therapists are trained to support anyone who is suffering with any kind of hearing related condition. So that could be a variety of things, including tinnitus, but also hearing loss. Also something called hyperacusis, which I'm going to talk about a bit later, where you're super sensitive to sounds, unusually sensitive to sounds. So they do a variety of things. One of the most important things in me learning to live with tinnitus was accessing hearing therapy. And I did that through here in the UK in the NHS. I was lucky that where I lived there was a hearing therapist that I could see for free. And because resources were stretched, I didn't see her weekly at first, but I was able to get some really good advice from her at the beginning. And then as time went on, I saw her over, maybe it was every couple of weeks, maybe once a month, depending on how I was getting on. And with her, I tackled a lot of the issues that I'm going to talk about now. And it was really important just to talk to somebody who understood what I was going through and who had all the training and experience to help me with that. So that's the first thing that I would outline. I'm not going to go into every single thing here about what we did. I'm going to actually split it up into different sections. So the second thing that was really important for me was sound therapy. So sound therapy is lots of different things. It's essentially using sound to help if you have disturbing tinnitus, but it can be used for other things. Not just tinnitus, but in my specific situation, I used firstly in-ear sound generators. I'll put a picture up of them on the screen now. I'll also put a link to where you can get them. I got one free on the NHS, but I bought myself a second one. And basically they look like a hearing aid. They go in your ear and they're very, very discreet. Hardly anyone noticed I was wearing them. And they pump out white noise into your ear, and you're supposed to set them just below the level of your tinnitus. White noise is a wide band of frequency sound, so it sounds like the static on a television, or kind of like a bit on static on the radio. It's not necessarily the most pleasant sound, but I found it really helpful in just taking my brain off the constant tinnitus tone. So I had other sound to balance it out. I want to stress though, I didn't mask my tinnitus. I know that that's a technique that has been used, but it's kind of been disproven in being effective at actually helping quieten or habituate your tinnitus. So I wouldn't recommend that, but I used the in-ear sound generators just to balance out the sound, and I put them just below the level of my tinnitus. I used it for 6 hours every day for around about 2 years. That obviously sounds like a long time. If you've just developed tinnitus, that's going to be daunting. But what I would say is that after a while I got so used to it, it was just like brushing my teeth, putting them in. And I really do believe that it helped me so much, just helped my brain to stop focusing on the sound, which was so hard at the beginning. The second thing that I used are pillow speakers. Now, pillow speakers are, they're like little speakers. Actually, hang on a minute, I'll get some to show you. They're speakers that you can put into your pillows, and they're really kind of handy for travelling with. This is what they look like. So you can see that's the sort of speaker bit that you put in your pillow, and then it's just got a little mini jack which you put into your phone. I mean, I would just plug it into my phone like this, and I would play, I got a MP3 of Running Water, and so I play that all night as I slept. And again, I just got so used to it. It was like any other health routine that I did. And it helped me get to sleep at night. And I know that for many people out there with tinnitus, sleeping's really hard, but this really helped me. So I'd really recommend getting a pair of them if you're having problems sleeping. I used them for at least 2 years, 2 or 3 years before I was able to really sleep without them. Again, that might sound daunting, but the reality is that they helped me to start leading more of a normal life. So the next thing that I used with sound therapy is if I was in a situation where I didn't have a lot of sound in the room, it sounds so simple, but open a window. I know that sounds really rudimental, but if you open a window, then it's just going to let a bit more sound in, and that really helped when I was, say, in an office or something like that. Another thing that some people do is that they have MP3s of just sound, again, like running water. It could be, some people use a forest, wind, the jungle, and they just play it in their room, and it means, again, that you're not focusing on your tinnitus. Again, I wouldn't use it to mask it so you can't hear your tinnitus, but use it just so that it is there with your tinnitus, and it just helps your brain to not focus on it too much. So the next thing that I want to talk to you about is relaxation. So relaxation does kind of segue in from sound therapy. A lot of the sound therapy that I used was relaxing, just because it's relaxing to not be focusing on your tinnitus, but it's also relaxing to be listening to sounds like water. But I also really got into meditation, and I would say, again, this is a really, really key part of me learning to live with tinnitus, was learning to relax. And in the beginning I was meditating a lot because I was just getting really bad headaches with the tinnitus. I was really having a lot of sort of emotional problems because of the tinnitus, which I'll get onto later. But the relaxation was massive. So I actually ended up spending my evenings when I came back from college just meditating on my own, because I started to really notice that as I relaxed, my tinnitus started to quieten down, and I would have, massive clusters of tones, not just one tone. And the more I meditated and the more I relaxed, the fewer tones there were, the less volume there was, and the less troubling it was. But I also started to really understand how I was feeling emotionally and how I was thinking about things, and I just got a greater understanding of myself at a really crucial time when that's really important when you have a health problem. So meditation was the one for me, but for other people it could be yoga, for somebody else it could be exercise, and I also did make sure that I exercised, and that did help. Also for somebody else it could be listening to music, and I know if you've got tinnitus, especially at the beginning, the idea of listening to music can be problematic because you just get frustrated that you can also hear your tinnitus. But if you try and focus on the music and, focus on the things that you're enjoying about the music, then that can be very relaxing. It just depends who you are, what works for you. So the next thing that really helped was hearing protection. So a lot of people don't really use hearing protection when they should. All of us should use hearing protection when we're out in a loud club or a gig, or even the London Underground gets louder than is actually safe for your hearing. It's important to not take it too far and use hearing protection all the time because you're worried that every sound is going to make your tinnitus worse. But I found it really useful for going and socialising again, knowing that I had my hearing protection with me, and if we ended up in a noisy bar or we ended up in a gig or something like that, I had a backup plan that meant I wouldn't go home and my tinnitus wouldn't be crazy. So I carry my hearing protection around with me everywhere in a little key ring. You can get hearing protection very cheap now. I would definitely recommend going for not the cheapest, go for one that's actually got some proper design behind it that's going to protect your hearing. I went for ones that are recommended for DJs, but you can just have a look online and there's loads of different options, so I definitely recommend investing in hearing protection. The next one that I'm going to talk about, which was really important for me to get a handle on, was emotions. Now this was really, really key. I would say that of everything, this is probably the most important thing about how to learn to live with tinnitus. I started to really understand by researching tinnitus, and I really researched the neurological side of it, the psychological side of it, the emotional side of it. And what kept cropping up was how important emotions are in the perpetuation of it, the disturbance of it, and how well you're able to live your life despite having it. So I, at the beginning, had huge amounts of fear around my tinnitus. I hated being in a quiet room, which was really difficult because I was studying sound art at the time. I was doing a PhD, and that meant loads of time in soundproof studios. So there was a lot of fear around just general day-to-day things to do with work, socialising. It was really, really difficult, and sleeping as well. Just everything became a kind of fearful prospect of how I was going to live my life while also listening to this really, really loud sound. That led to lots of feelings of despair, and also anxiety, just general anxiety. Even if I wasn't feeling kind of full-blown fear, I had a low-lying anxiety all the time. I definitely felt really suicidal. I'm not ashamed to admit that, and I think it's important to talk about that because there are lots of people out there who feel like that when they develop tinnitus. And I think that for me, that's why it was really important to be really honest with myself about how I was thinking and feeling about the condition. So I read a book called Tinnitus Retraining Therapy, which was a kind of massive turning point in research into tinnitus treatment, and it was published, I think it was either the end of the 80s or the early 90s. And in it, it outlines the way that emotions and your thoughts really impact on how much you perceive your tinnitus, the volume of it, the distressfulness of it, and the likelihood or your ability to habituate it. And habituating means that even if your tinnitus is there, you are not noticing it, and therefore you're not perceiving it. And I know that might sound quite abstract, but believe me, it's true. People have achieved this, it works. And to my knowledge, it is the best or most effective treatment that's as close to a cure as there is right now. So a massive part of that is emotions, and there's a lot of kind of neurological research behind this. I'll put a link to some of that so that if you're that way inclined, you can go and look that up. But it meant that I started to really try and develop acceptance, to accept that the tinnitus was there. Now, I didn't mean that I had to like that. It didn't mean that it was having to be my best friend, but I had to accept that this was a part of me right now. May not be forever, but at that moment in time it was there, and I had to accept that. So that meant I had to start to be okay with that. So that also required a lot of patience. This is not something that is achievable overnight. It took me months and months and months, probably even years, to really get to the point where I am now, where it does not bother me. I promise you, it does not bother me. If somebody took my tinnitus away tomorrow, I'd be like, nah, that's okay, that's cool. But it wouldn't make a massive difference to me. This took me a long time, and it did require patience, but it was so worth it. So the other really positive thing that I developed emotionally was compassion. I had to develop compassion for myself. Again, this took patience, this took time, but it's really, really important, because I blamed myself so much in that I thought, the reason my tinnitus was perpetuating was because I was thinking about it too much. And I was thinking about it too much because I was an anxious person, or I was a neurotic person, and somebody else would have just let it float away and gone on with their life. So I blame myself a lot. But I think that in developing that compassion for myself and going through that difficult time, it really developed compassion for other people much more in me, which I'm really, really glad about. But I needed to do that, to have compassion for myself in order to accept what was going on and be patient with myself. So all those three things, acceptance, patience, compassion, they all kind of link into each other, really. Lastly, try and find, wherever you live, try and find your National Tinnitus Association. So here in the UK, that would be the British Tinnitus Association. There's also Action on Hearing Loss, but there's associations all over the world, and even if you don't live in that country, you can still go and look at the information if there's not something local to you. But wherever you are in the world, I would really recommend the British Tinnitus Association website. There is so much information, and when you're in crisis mode, and especially if you've just developed it, if you can educate yourself, it will really take the fear away. It will take the fear out of it, because you will understand what's going on. One of the most difficult things about tinnitus is that it's so difficult to get a grip on what is going on. It's a very hard change to make in your life. Even if it's a temporary change, tinnitus doesn't affect everyone for the whole of their lives. It can actually just last for weeks, months, years. But I would definitely go on a reputable website to get some really good information. Do not hunt around on the internet for quick fixes. There are so many bogus people that are taking advantage of people in crisis mode. People that will swear that they can cure your tinnitus, ointments that will cure your tinnitus, etc., etc. So far, there is not a cure for tinnitus that will work for everyone. When there is, you will absolutely know about it. So the best thing you can do is inform yourself, and know that for the vast, vast majority of people, it gets better, if not goes away. So then that brings me to another thing that was really important, which was language. So language feeds in really importantly to emotion. The parts of your brain that you process language are similar to the ones that you process emotion. That's a very basic way of talking about it, but that's why language is so important. I'm not talking about this in any kind of life coachy NLP way. If that's your bag, that's great, but I'm really talking about it from a practical point of view. I really had to start addressing the words that I was using in relation to my tinnitus. So this was really simple. It was really about things like, I wasn't fighting my tinnitus anymore. I was encountering it. So I didn't see it as something that I had to battle against. I saw it as something that I just had to sometimes encounter, and when I encountered it, to not associate words like fear and despair and hopelessness, but just to associate words like normal and everyday and I don't know, mundane really. I just tried to kind of bring that level of negativity down to something neutral. And again, I'm not saying that I tried to make tinnitus a positive experience. I think that would be futile, because it's very unlikely that I was ever going to feel like that, especially at the beginning. So I never tried to make it like, I love my tinnitus. Tinnitus is really important to me. It makes me feel great. I never said that to myself. But when it would intrude and it was really difficult, and I'd feel those feelings of fear and those thoughts come up about what's my future going to be like? How am I ever going to do this thing? How am I ever going to concentrate? How am I ever going to sleep again? I would just try and change it up and say, right, I'm encountering my tinnitus right now, and that's okay. I'm encountering it, and this is a normal thing that happens every day. It's totally fine, and in a while it will quieten back down again. Again, this took patience, and it took a long time, but I got there. And I fully believe if you keep at it, anyone will get there with this. And it really helped, like it really, really helped for me to stop focusing on it, to stop putting all my attention into battling through it each day, because I stopped seeing it as a battle. And that freed up mental space for me to just get on with my work, to actually be there and be present with people, not be monitoring how loud or quiet it was, not be worrying all the time about what different situations, how they would affect it, if I was eating the right things, if I was drinking the right things. So language is really important. You really have to be reflect on how you're using language in relation to your emotions and your tinnitus. This kind of brings me on to something that's a bit different to tinnitus, but for me was so related, which is hyperacusis. So I mentioned this earlier on in the video. I found that because the way that I developed tinnitus was through an ear infection and blocked earwax in my left ear, which meant that I had a long time where I couldn't really hear very well out of that ear, and there was a lot of pressure in my head until that was all cleared. What it meant was that once the sound did come back in my ear and my ear was cleared again and there was no infection, I had extreme sensitivity to sounds. Not as extreme as some people have, but I had developed hyperacusis, and this meant that I couldn't be in a room with more than one other person. If there were two people in a room talking, it was too loud. So that meant it was horrible trying to socialise in groups of people, and I was in my mid-20s, and that's how we socialised most of the time, was hanging out together and going out. It meant that going to a club or something like that was terrifying, not just because of the tinnitus, but because it was so uncomfortable to hear any sound over a quiet speaking voice. So really all of the things that I mentioned, especially the emotional stuff and the language stuff and the relaxation stuff, will really help if you have hyperacusis. I found that over time it settled. Again, it took patience, it took compassion with myself, it took acceptance, but over time it did level out. I fully believe that me taking care of myself with meditation, exercising, being aware of my emotions helped with that process, in it getting much better and me being able to hear sounds normally again. So if anyone's suffering from hyperacusis, I hope that's some comfort. I hope that this video is helpful to you too. So I guess I'll end by saying I now manage to live with my tinnitus where I do not use my sound in-ear generators. I do not use my pillow speakers. I still meditate, but because I found it so helpful for all these other parts of my life that I never expected. So I meditate really because of that rather than having tinnitus. It never makes me feel desperate, fearful, suicidal now ever. And like I said before, if somebody took it away tomorrow, I wouldn't care. There are so many people out there who live with tinnitus and live incredibly enjoyable lives, who fulfill all of their ambitions and dreams, who have incredible relationships, and who, despite having tinnitus, are really, really loving what they're doing and have learnt to live with it. Please, please do not listen to all of the incredibly desperate conversations on chat rooms. I made this mistake at first because I wasn't being heard by my GP. I went there to try and get information. All of the people on there are people who are not coping well with their tinnitus, which is a shame, but that is not the overall experience of many, many people. I really, really hope that the techniques and ideas in this video will help you manage your own tinnitus. It's perfectly possible as well that over time your tinnitus will go away. Many, many people find that. It hasn't yet happened for me, but it is so much quieter now. I cannot even tell you like the difference between when I first had it. It was literally like having a battery up to my ear day and night, to now where I only hear it in quiet rooms, and it's usually just like a hiss, and sometimes I hear tones, but that's it. I really can live with it. I'm a musician, so hearing is incredibly important to me. So I'm not dumbing anything down, or I'm not somebody that, you know, I wouldn't be thinking about it that much anyway. Listening and hearing is so important to me. So if I've learnt to live with it, then I'm really sure that you can too. I'm going to put links to all of the things I've talked about, like I said before, like where to get the pillow speakers if you want them, the in-ear sound generators. There's a whole bunch of stuff on the Action on Hearing Loss website and the British Tinnitus Association website. I'll put links to them down there. Educate yourself using these links and anything else you find from reputable sources. There is really good information out there, and it's really important to be knowledgeable. It will give you so much more control over your condition. So I'll put all of those links down there. I really hope that you are able to manage your tinnitus in the way that I've outlined. And if you have any questions, or you want to add your voice into this, please comment below. I'd love to hear what you think of this video. I'd love to hear about your experiences. And please share this video if you think it's going to help anyone you know. Okay, bye then.